If you know anything about the aim training community, then you'll know Viscose. She's one of the best aimers in the world, currently in the top 10 on the Voltaic leaderboard, and someone who literally circumcised her mouse just to make the cable more flexible. Viscose, I love whatever is wrong with you. And now the queen of target switching has descended from the aim training heavens and graced us with her very own aiming benchmarks. And I'm gonna be trying them for 7 days and see how high of a rank I can get and answer the following questions. How well do these scenarios translate to in-game application? Are these benchmarks beginner friendly? And how do they compare to Voltaic's benchmarks? To find out the answers to these questions, it's time to start with the first benchmark, easier scenarios. The first thing I noticed, and something that I really appreciate, is that the scenarios are categorized in muscle groups. This is very useful, especially for beginners, so that you can actually understand what it is that you're training. And not only that, but it makes it easier to identify what muscle groups could be a potential weak point. It took me about 75 minutes to complete the full easier scenarios playlist, and that's with me breezing through the scenarios and barely replaying them. I reached seal complete with pretty minimal effort, which according to Viscose would put me around Voltaic mid-diamond. This isn't too surprising since I am currently Jade complete on the Season 5 Voltaic benchmarks. And I know it's only day 1, but I do have to say, I'm really liking the scenarios that are picked here. With the Voltaic benchmarks, I could only really do them like twice a week because otherwise it would feel like a quote-unquote waste of time because I didn't feel like the scenarios would always translate well to in-game. So far with Viscose benchmarks, however, I really didn't feel like that. It felt productive, and I like how I can really improve certain weaknesses and still be benchmarking at the same time. One thing that I am questioning right away though is how beginner-friendly this playlist is. I think the playlist was intentionally called easier scenarios instead of easy benchmarks or beginner, which I can absolutely understand. Most of these scenarios were pretty easy for me, but I've accumulated about 125 hours of aim training in the past year. So I'm not a beginner, but I can definitely see a complete novice or a beginner struggle with this playlist. I ended day 1 with confidence, but day 2 humbled me quite a bit. It was time to do the medium scenarios benchmarks, and wow, this one is much harder than the easier one, which, well, kind of makes sense. The scenarios are pretty much the same, but with an increased difficulty. My scores are very mixed per scenario as well, and after going through all the scenarios, I am currently sitting at Cerulean. In terms of a Voltaic rank, that would put me in mid-Jade to low master, which kind of surprised me in a good way, because after finishing these scenarios, I felt pretty bad about myself because I felt like I did terrible. But I think that's mostly because most of these scenarios are new to me. Viscose has added multiple air scenarios, which are scenarios that contain a floating ball or pill of terror and will make you want to pull your hair out. I'm not even joking, by the way. I think my hairline receded by like half a centimeter, but unfortunately though, I do have to admit that they're good practice. On the Voltaic Season 5 benchmarks, you don't have these as much, which is pretty sad because I have noticed that they're great for people that lack stability. And people. For day 3, all I want to do is focus on getting all my Celadon scores up to Cerulean. A lot of these scenarios target my weak points, so I'm glad I can focus on that. These are my current Celadon scores. And if you're wondering why it's ugly in black and white, it's because I'm an amateur and I forgot to take a screenshot, then I had to restore an old version of the sheet, yappa yappa yappa, anyway, just ignore it. I got started and all I gotta say is Control Sphere Novice is an actual bitch. One thing that I struggle with a lot is matching the speed of the target whenever I'm tracking it. So I decided to practice on 51 centimeters per 360 to force myself to speed up. However, I noticed that it actually wasn't that hard to match the speed of my target. So that made me doubt myself. Is the issue the speed, or is it the stability and control that I lack? It's probably both because I'm shit, but that's besides the point. Anyway, so I changed my sense to about 26 centimeters per 360 and really focused on being as stable and controlled as possible. I gradually improved my score and I decided to try the scenario at 43 centimeters, and then I hit my high score, which was like 46 short of Cerulean, and I've been doing this scenario for over an hour now and I have to give it up for today. But the positive of training on a much higher sense is that it did translate into more stability because I crushed my previous Control Sphere high score, which is now sitting at Lavender. Now it's almost 3 a.m. and I'm pretty tired, so that's all the practice I could get in. second, but I do feel like it can only go up from here. Like, I'm feeling positive. Yeah, no, I hella lied. So when I opened the benchmark sheet on day 4, I noticed a change. This scenario with the long ass name was replaced by PGTI Voltaic Easy. And wow, do I hate it. The first place were very frustrating. Also, unpopular opinion, but I absolutely hate scenarios that go completely overhead and then bounce off the ceiling. Like, what FPS game does this even happen in, bro? Like, the only balls I see bounce off ceilings is Rocket League. Like, this shit doesn't happen to FPS games. I mean, sure, Viscose has like thousands and thousands of hours in FPS games, and I have about, what, 2,000 accumulated over the past 12 years? So does she know better than me? Yeah, she does. Is it a skill issue on my part? Yeah, it is. Either way, I usually replay scenarios over and over and over again for a long time before I get a score that I'm satisfied with. But with this scenario, I got a Celadon score after 20 minutes and just had to end it there because I cannot be bothered grinding this scenario for much longer. So I just continue with all the other scenarios where I'm still stuck on the Celadon score, and one of them is Air Pure Intermediate. This scenario should be called Air Pure Dog Shit. This has to be the most rage-inducing scenario out there. Like, I don't have anger issues, but if I did, nothing around me would be safe while I'm playing this scenario. If you enjoy this, you need to be in prison. Like, I'm not even joking, bro. You need prison and you need a psychologist. Like, who enjoys having to grind a long-ass scenario that doesn't even show your score mid-scenario, so you're just forced to stick around until the end until you can see that you haven't hit a high score for the 10th time? Yeah, screw that, bro. And on top of that, my performance was badly affected by my hyperhidrosis. If you know, you know. So after 2.5 hours and it being almost 3 a.m., I have to call it quits for today. On day 5, I noticed that quite a few new scenarios were added. You can see them right here, the ones with no score. There's been quite a few changes these past days, but that's not too surprising since these benchmarks are still a work in progress. Unfortunately, due to lack of time, I wasn't able to do anything else but focus on the new scenarios for today. And you know, I feel like I did pretty well. I had some nice scores here and there. I actually really liked the scenarios that were added, and they also felt quite familiar since the Voltaic benchmarks has very similar scenarios. Alright, for day 6, it was time to get my grind up and not my funny up. No more sulking, no more being frustrated over certain scenarios. It was time to lock in. And that I did. I aim trained for 5 hours, focusing on the few Celadon scenarios that are left and scenarios where I know I can do better than my current score. So I started with PGTI Voltaic Easy, a scenario that was aging me by the minute, but after almost 30 minutes, I finally got that to a cerulean score. After that, it was time for Air Pure Dog Intermediate. Man, I can't express my hatred for this scenario enough. Anyway, surprisingly, it only took me about 18 minutes to get the score I needed for cerulean, and I was so happy. Ignore the thumbs down in the bottom left corner though. And after all that, I hit cerulean complete. According to Viscose's reference list, that would put me around Voltaic mid-J to low master, which actually is pretty accurate. For the final day, I decided to grind out the Voltaic Season 5 benchmarks in hopes I could make the push to master, and see if doing Viscose's benchmarks for 6 days made any noticeable improvements. The scenarios in the Voltaic Intermediate playlist were definitely still hard, but it also felt like they were a bit easier at the same time. It felt as if I knew how to approach certain scenarios better than I did before. The Voltaic benchmarks are categorized in scenario types like clicking, tracking, and switching, and I feel like you just kinda have to figure out for yourself what muscle groups are primarily targeted. Viscose does the work for you in her benchmarks, which made it easier to really focus on what you want to train. And I do feel like that contributed to me reaching master on the Voltaic benchmarks on day 7. So, 7 days later, I spent about 15 hours trying Viscose's benchmarks, and my conclusion is, I really like them. Are the scenarios that she picked frustrating at times? Absolutely. But I feel like that's also necessary because it makes you feel challenged. In her benchmark sheet, she writes that she picked out scenarios that she found the most helpful for in-game translation, and although I did not have the time to put that to the test yet, I can definitely see it as being true. But one small thing I do have to say, I don't think these benchmarks are suited for complete beginners. Some scenarios scenarios have been made easier since the time of recording this, so if you are completely new, absolutely give the easier scenarios a try. But if you're struggling so much that you have no idea what you're doing, or it's physically and mentally tiring, or you can't get a lemming score, I personally think it's better to switch to Voltaic's novice benchmarks until you hit Iron Complete, and then try Viscose's scenarios again. I am very curious about the experience of people that are currently C or below, so if you're one of them, please let me know your opinion in the comments. With that being said though, and I don't want to start any beef, I feel like Viscose's benchmarks right now are kinda superior to Voltaic's. The selection of scenarios are very varied and challenge every single muscle group, and to me feel less physically exhausting. And it doesn't feel like I'm benchmarking. I'm actually getting efficient training in that is worth my time. Don't get me wrong, I don't think Voltaic is bad at all, and I will still be doing Voltaic's benchmarks from time to time for the sole reason of ranking up, but for practice, I will be switching to Viscose's scenarios. All in all, her benchmarks are absolutely worth trying for anyone that is serious about improving their aim, especially if you aim train solely for the reason of being good at an FPS game. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.